Another aspect of cross-cultural pragmatics is listener behavior and its impact on cross-cultural pragmatics. One aspect of interactional talk which has been ignored in various cross-cultural studies is probably listener's behavior. How listener responds to a certain talk, what kind of cues he generates, does have an impact on the overall construction as well as the meaning of a talk. And listener behavior and his cues does vary from culture to culture. And that makes it an important area of cross-cultural pragmatics. And that's why we are discussing it right now. Hall, based on one of his studies and also based on his knowledge of various cultures and ethnographic studies, he came to the conclusion, which he shares with us very frankly, that after many years he slowly learned that how people pay attention to you does vary from culture to culture. I mean, you are in a talk with somebody, and how the listener responds to your talk is a point of variation between various cultures. And it ultimately took him some time to know this. In this regard, he gives us a specific example about Navajo people. He says when somebody in Navajo culture directly looks at you, that means that's a kind of sign for anger or disagreement in a severe way. So looking at somebody directly at Navajo would display anger. We have similar findings from other studies as well. For example, in a study which was conducted by Rickson and his companion, it tells us that in a certain American academic setting, we can see that African American students they do display attention and listenership in a more direct and open way, overt way, as compared to their other counterparts. So we have similar findings from other studies also. The cues which a listener generates in a certain conversations are also known as back channel cues. Cues are given by the listener to the speaker in a certain conversational situation, usually in a situation where there is certain long talk or certain argument is being raised by the speaker, or there is some kind of narration of a story or some other kind of discussion. Interesting thing here is, as far as cross-cultural pragmatics, is that there are certain cultural norms which are embedded with these cues, and people give different cues or give the same cues in different ways in different culture. For example, how we show agreement to a certain point of view which is shared to us by somebody might vary from one culture to culture. There might be a different gesture in one culture and a different gesture in another culture. There might be a different word in one culture and entirely a different word in another culture. In this regard, we can cite an example from Japanese culture. Japanese, they very transparently discuss the need for the listener to chime in a patterned manner in order to show politeness during a conversation. If this kind of behavior does not exist in a conversation between two people, there would be an absence of the politeness. The cross-cultural mismatches between interlocutors of different languages may arise regarding the location and frequency of listener responses. Research on the location of listener responses shows that they tend to occur at the ends of the utterance or at the end of phonemic clauses, and usually the semantic, phonemic, prosodic or grammatical cues, they co-occur, they come together. For example, somebody might say something and also shows a gesture to complement it. So lexical and the gesture related cues might co-occur. Listener behavior in various talks may signal multiple things, and some of them are presented in front of you. For example, listener behavior might show some attentiveness as you are listening to the speaker very carefully and attentively. So there are different ways to say this in different cultures. For example, we might nod our head in order to show attentiveness, or we might sit still or stand still to listen to the speaker, or we might have an eyeball to eyeball contact with the speaker in order to show attentiveness. It might show understanding, and ways of showing it vary from culture to culture. Listeners' cues does show that their understanding of what is being said, and absence of certain cues in a serious conversation might result into the impression to the speaker that the listener is not understanding it. So the culturally useful cues are sometimes very important to be given in various situations during a talk in order to show to the speaker that you are understanding what he or she is trying to say. Similarly, our cues as a listener also show agreement, and they also show a signal to continue the talk. If you're in the middle of a talk and the speaker would probably need your signal, which would allow him to continue to talk in most situations, and especially in the situations where politeness matters. So, in short, we could assume that it's not only speaker, rather listener's behavior is also very important to understand cross-cultural pragmatics.